Hey everyone, this is Becoming a Bible Nerd. I'm Carrie Hunt, and I'm so glad that you are joining us. We believe this ancient Eastern text was never meant to study alone, so we choose to do it in community. We'll take one book a semester, one chapter a week, and really dig in to understand the context and the culture that the book was written in so that we can better understand what God was saying to our lives. Our goal is to equip you and your community to fall more in love with Jesus because you have fallen in love with his word. This season, we're going through the book of 1 Corinthians, and today's episode is chapter 11, verses 1 through 16, head coverings. So today I decided to break this up. There will be two separate podcasts, even though I'll release them both on the same day because it's too much to cover. It's too much goodness. I do want to thank everyone that supports our ministry. And if you would like to be one of our ministry partners, you can go to becomingbiblenerd.com, click on the giving tab, and you can give a one-time gift or you can set up for monthly support. And we do thank you for that. And I do also want to remind you that we have a Bible study bash that's happening November 16th, where one of our team members is releasing her very first Bible study that is written in Bible nerd fashion. And we have a guest speaker coming in to teach us some tools to Bible study that honestly, that I don't know, I'm excited about learning. And so the event can be found, sign up can be found on the Facebook page. And we encourage you just to come out. Even if you don't know Shara, come out, celebrate with us, and learn how to verse map. So we're going to get started today with chapter 11, and it's a very unique, interesting topic. It's about women wearing head covers. So join with me. He starts off in verse 1 saying, "Imitate me as I also imitate Christ." That is basic discipleship. Discipleship starts here with us following in the footstep of older, wiser, more mature leaders who they're not perfect, but we definitely can walk and grow and learn how to do this Christian walk by following the example of somebody humble and loving that mirrors Jesus. The rest of this chapter is going to shift from the heavy topics that we have been talking about to now how to conduct yourself during a worship service. So he says, "Now I praise you." So this is a compliment, "because you always remember me and keep the traditions just as I delivered them to you." He's talking about his teaching along with other apostles' teachings. They're remembering this. They're even writing him and asking him for guidance, and he applauses them for that. He says, "But I do want you to know that Christ is the head of every man, and the man is the head of the woman, and God is the head of the church. Every man who prays or prophesies with something on his head dishonors his head." Okay, a couple of things here. We're saying head a lot. In fact, there's going to be 17 times in this book, or in this letter, that he uses the word head. Paul's objecting to the blurring of genders here, and he's wanting men to stand out and to look different. And really, the dress of people is going to vary from culture to culture. So what we're talking about today is specific to the Corinthian culture. And this is a time where Roman men worshiped with their head covered. So this is all about being set apart, where there's no confusion on who you are and the order that God has put things in. And he does not want these people looking like the pagans. In Christianity, there's a distinction of roles. It's biblical between men and women. There's an order. Just like God was, then Jesus, and then man, and then woman was created from man. The head is the person we follow, the one leading. He is not saying that you are inferior to the head. He's just saying that you have to fall under the authority of the leader. This is much like a boss and worker employee relationship. You might have bigger credentials, you might be more educated, you might be better off in society, you might be a better human being if you're the employee, but ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to fall in line and submit to the boss. So it's not saying that you're inferior to him. It's just there has to be order, and there's a head, and everyone else needs to subject themselves to submission to the head. Now, what he is not talking about, he is not talking about a superiority to an inferiority. He's not talking about equality versus inequality. And he's not talking about ability versus inability. There is just a natural authority or government that there must be a head and a lead. Even in the Trinity, we see this. God was the head. Even though Jesus was co-equal and eternal, he still submitted to the Father. And then you have the Holy Spirit. One of our team members really struggled. I knew this was going to be a chapter that triggered her, and she wasn't able to come that day. So she was like, "Oh, I've got to FaceTime in. I'll be at home. Y'all don't leave me." And as soon as we called her up, she said, "This chapter, just had her reeling." But she ended up stopping and praying and saying, "Okay, Lord, I want to submit to you. So what are you teaching me?" And very quickly, in God's loving kindness, he brought to the forefront of her mind that she was reading this through the lens of her first marriage that was toxic and where there was an abuse of power in that. And where she said, she looked at it in the light of her current marriage, where she's happily married to a very loving husband that emulates Christ. And she's like, I have no problem submitting to him. But when I read this, like, all of this anger came up. So I want to take some time to address, these are real things that can happen. We can read this in the light of bad experiences, but remember that man is commanded by God to love the woman as Christ loved the church. What did Christ do? He laid down his life for a church that didn't even, or for a people that didn't even accept him, and even his own followers at the end of his life scattered. They were scared. One of them denied him, but he still laid down the life. That is love. That is sacrificial love. And that is what the head of the home is called to do, to love his wife, to love his family as Christ loved the church. I was listening to a podcast this morning. Somebody had told me, "Oh, you would really like this pastor." And so I was checking out a podcast, and the very first one that I landed on, or the most recent one, happened to be an interview with somebody who I admire in the Christian world, that is just a giant in the faith and in love and in humility and all the things that embody a man of God. And the topic was on abusive leaders. And it caught my attention because while I had the most loving grandfather, and the most loving and compassionate and gracious dad, and then I'm married to a man that is very easy to submit to. He's very loving and wonderful. So while I have not had these bad experiences in my home, I have had them in the workplace. And so it caught my attention. And as I was listening, he very quickly pointed out that we're called to be servant leaders, just as Christ served the church. And he comes in, and even in his last days, what he could have said, "I'm Jesus, I'm the Son of God, the creator of the universe, and you have to worship me because I'm better than all of y'all." He could have done that, but he didn't. He came in, and we see glimpses of this humility and this overwhelming love, like the woman at the well, where he goes up and he should not even be talking to her because he would have been unclean. She was a sinner. She was a woman. She was a Samaritan. And not only does he talk to her, he's like, "Oh, can I have a drink?" And he doesn't have a vessel, so he is going to drink after this woman's vessel. He comes to her in humility saying, "Hey, I need something," or like, "There's something you can do that would help me." Not in a selfish way, but I feel like I'm explaining this wrong. He went to her saying, "Hey, I'm looking up to you. You have something that you can give me," before he opened up and gave her the truth of his knowledge of her being married 5 times and walking her through what repentance and what living water is like. We also see him washing his disciples' feet. And ultimately, he's going to die on the cross. So that is a picture of a servant leader. That is a picture of what Jesus did. Abusive leaders, and we can say abusive people in our life, or insecure, and they have a need to assert the power. I'm the boss. I'm the leader. I'm the, if they have to say that, then there is signs of insecurity there. And so the pastor that I respect was going through a list of 7 red flags. If your boss exudes these things. And as he was reading, I was like, oh, experience that. And all of this to say, this is not the type of leader that Jesus is commanding us to submit to. And in fact, this pastor said, if you see one of these 7, you need to start praying about leaving. And I thought, oh, wow. And he said, if there's 2 of them, you need to strongly consider leaving. And if there's 3 of these things present that you can identify, you need to run for your life. So this is not what God is calling us to submit to. He is calling a healthy give and take relationship between a man and a woman submits to the man as he covers her and protects her and loves her and will lay down his life for her. Okay, are we good with that? So then he goes on to say, but every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since this is one and the same as having her head shaved. This head shaving was a sign of prostitution in that day if you were found guilty. So if the woman's head is not covered, her hair should be cut off. It's just the same. But if it is disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off, then it is also disgrace for her head to be uncovered. Well, here, a woman's head covering was a sign of her being under the authority and submission and protection of someone else. It was a picture that she is submitting to the authority and the order that God has called. Again, the head being shaved was a punishment of adulterers in some countries. And in Israel, women would loosen her hair as a sign of prostitution. And other women would cover their heads when they went out. And the idea was to show the world that they're taken. It's like how we wear a wedding ring, that they are not available. And in Corinth, you would remember the temple to Aphrodite had 1,000 temple prostitutes, and they would come down into the city, into the marketplace, not wearing veils. And this was also kind of a feminist movement in that day and age. And also the women would cut their hair short. And so ultimately, Paul is saying, do not look like the world. Be set apart. Be different. We're called to be set apart. In verse 7, he goes on and says, a man, in fact, should not cover his head because he is God's image and glory, but man's glory. For man did not come from woman, but woman came from man. And man is not created for woman, but woman for man. This is why a woman should have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. In the Lord, however, woman is not independent of man, and man is not independent of woman. For just as woman came from man, so man comes through woman, for all things come from God. So this is interesting. One of the things that he is saying, again, I repeat, that this is establishing an order, and man and woman are falling in submission by men not wearing head coverings because their role is to take the lead and they answer to God. And remember the Romans, they would cover their head. Let's not look like the Romans. And women are to wear the head coverings to show their submission to man. And I find this so interesting because, anywhere that the gospel went forward, women were liberated. And in the New Testament, women begin to have more rights. The Lord sees man and woman as a unit. This is what he's saying. In this talk, he's like, they are a unit, and God pulled woman from man's rib. Remember that. But then also, he's reminding, so as woman came from man, men are also birthed through a woman. So this is a mutual, interdependent, and a complementary system of each other. This statement is really honoring women and giving them some rights and not just seeing them as property. So it's a beautiful thing. And he goes on to say, judge for yourselves, is it proper for a woman to pray with her head uncovered? Like he's saying, now, you know this to be true. You've heard our teachings. You see how the pagans participate. Judge for yourself. Does not even nature itself teach you that that if a man has long hair, it's a disgrace for him? He doesn't say it's a sin here. He's saying it's a disgrace. But that if a woman has long hair, it is her glory, for her hair is given to her as a covering. But if anyone wants to argue about this, we have no other custom, nor do the churches of God. Basically, here he is saying that the issue is in Corinth, and he's saying we don't really have any oral rules about this. And then he warns them, don't make something of this. The point is to be modest. Don't dress to get attention. If a woman came with her head uncovered, that would have given her attention. If a man did something counterculture, let his hair grow real long in this culture, then that would have been drawing attention. The intention is to be on God. This is cultural application for this day, but how we can apply it is, let's not do things to stand out and get attention. So I do want to share a very interesting article that I found. Actually, a friend had sent it to me years ago, and I revisited this. Dr. Michael Heiser, I've talked about him a lot. He was a modern day scholar. He was fluent in like 5 Semitic languages. He worked for, he was the theologian that oversaw Logos Bible software, and he's just a humble guy. I mean, he's definitely a scholar. He just likes to sit around and read the foreign text, in the original language, and then he really teaches you how to not go on what you learned in seminary school, but let the text speak for itself and learn from it. So in his episode of Naked Bible, that's the name of the podcast, 86, if this piques your interest, then you can go Google or go into podcast search Naked Bible. It's episode 86. He reads an article by Troy W. Martin. The article, it's in a scholarly journal. It's called Paul's Argument from Nature for the Veil and the Covering, a Testicle instead of a Head Covering. This was found in the Journal of Biblical Literature, which is the premier journal on biblical study. All that to say that this guy is not just a wackadoo that I've Googled up. This is one of the most renowned scholars who has found work in an extremely scholarly source, read this article, and it made him think. Actually, he said that this article really makes the most sense. It's crazy, it's bizarre, but to Dr. Michael Heiser, it answered a lot of the questions that he had. Okay, so stick with me. Again, this is going to be one of those episodes that you need to not have your kids listening to. These Corinths, they keep causing Paul to bring up sexual things. So in this article, Troy Martin, who is I believe that he was an archaeologist more than a Bible scholar, but then in his study his understanding led him to understand this text in a unique way. He had found that in the Greek and Roman medical texts of that day, that Hippocrates had a strange belief. Hippocrates is the father of modern medicine. In fact, doctors have to take the Hippocratic oath. That name comes from Hippocrates, who was alive and well and making cutting-edge discoveries in Paul's day. The Greek and Roman medical and scientific thinking and beliefs were cutting edge. And in Greek literature, this word for covering that we read in the Bible, that the woman needs to have a head covering, it was parabolion, and it was used to describe testicles. So while it could be translated as head covering, it could also be translated as testicles. Y'all, just stick with me. So some Hippocratic authors believed and wrote and recorded that hair is hollow and grows from male or female reproductive fluid flowing into it and congealing, and that creates a fetus. Since hollow body parts attract fluid, then it attracts semen. The brain produces semen, and thus that's why most of the hair on a man grows from his head. A man with long hair will retain his semen, and the long hair will draw his semen to it and away from the woman. That's why long hair, this is what they're believing. So this possibly could be why Paul is saying his long hair is a disgrace to him. We are called to be fruitful and multiply. And if you're going to let your hair grow and your semen is going to get caught up in your hair instead of flowing to the woman, that's a disgrace. A woman's body is one large gland used to absorb. Now, Aristotle, another person who was his writings the people loved and valued. Remember, they're very philosophical people. Aristotle believed long, hollow hair increased the suction power of a woman's uterus. Hippocrates had a fertility test. A doctor would put a scented suppository inside of her, and the next day would smell her mouth to see if any of the channels were blocked. So this is crazy. This is crazy, but this is what the modern cutting-edge doctors of the day believed in their scientific study. And so basically, they're believing in this culture that hair is part of a female genitalia. It's her testicles. It's what sucks the semen out of the man's body, and her hair absorbs it, thus filling her uterus with a baby. This is crazy, but in this common belief at the time, which Paul, we know, was a scholar, and we know just from all of his preaching at different places, he was very philosophical. He kept up on all of the modern journals and writings. And so would it not make sense that if this is part of our genitalia, it needs to be covered when we go into worship? Another thing that sticks out that's very interesting is that he says in verse 10, this is why a woman should have the symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Now remember, the head covering put out a sign, I am taken and I'm submitting and I'm hiding my genitalia. And what could this mean? Because the angels, well, Dr. Michael Troy did not in his journal, he did not address this. So Michael Heiser wrote him and said, do you think that Paul said because of the angels, because of the incident that happened in Genesis 6, when the fallen angels came down and procreated with women here on earth, and they created the Nephilim, the men of renown, the half-breeds that ended up messing up earth so much that God had to bring a flood to wipe them out? And Troy's response was, absolutely, I think that that's what was in the back of Paul's mind. So, even though this is a crazy belief system, this could have been what helped shape Paul's view of, hey, let's cover our head because we do not need a Genesis 6 replay. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Women needed to be careful to show modesty, and Paul was concerned that this could happen again. And one of the things that, because we're really closing up on this, is that I have studied over the years, and it was really fascinating to me. And so I want to leave you with this, is when in today's culture, if I go and ask you, why is there sin? Why is there so much evil in the world? You would respond, oh, because of the fall. Because Adam and Eve slipped up, she ate that apple, she offered it to him, and now, boom, evil, sickness, all these things in the world. That's not exactly what the Jewish thought was. They saw that as a rebellion, but they didn't really put too much stock in that one incident. They saw the earth as having 3 falls. The first one being minor, but the next 2 being much more significant. In this, their view was this Genesis 6, that there is a lot of evil in this world because of Genesis 6. And in Jesus's day, in Paul's day, that's called Second Temple, because it's when the Second Temple was built, whenever Nehemiah helped build the Second Temple after the Babylonian Empire. All of these Jewish people would have been familiar with a book called Enoch. Now, the book of Enoch has been in some canons, but not in the canon that we know today as being inspired by the Word of God, but it was definitely something, just like a historian, Josephus. Scholars look at Josephus's work and what he says about the times and the day to understand more about the Bible. It is something that is a treasure to study, but they don't believe that it's inspired. They believe that he was just literally a guy documenting things of that day. Well, same thing about Enoch, that this was authored by someone that was in the Jewish community. And in the book of Enoch, it really tells and explains more of what happened when those fallen angels procreated in Genesis 6. He calls them the Watchers, and how much hidden knowledge that they introduce in society. So they see that as a major fall. And then the third major significant fall. So the first being Adam and Eve, they thought that was minor. The second being Genesis 6 with the Watchers and everything that they introduced to this world, witchcraft and sorcery and pharmakia. And then the third one would be Babel. And this is where, after mankind had gotten perverted, the Lord scattered the languages and scattered the people. But in Deuteronomy 32, it says that he disinherited the nations. And through Bible study, it appears that he has this divine council of little g Elohim, like little g gods. They were created by him, beings created by him that helped him rule and reign and make decisions. And when he scattered the people and disinherited the nations, he scattered his divine counsel to rule and reign over those, but he kept an allotment for himself, which would have been Israel. And later Abraham would have been his. And those angels, that divine counsel, many of them became corrupt with the power, and like the Prince of Persia that you see that battled Michael the Archangel, that because of this disinheriting of the nations, that's what brought in a lot of evil into this world. These are things that the Second Temple Jews were studying and reading about. And so this very well could have been what was on Paul's mind. Who knows? I just thought it was a very interesting thought from a very renowned source. And who knows? It's fun. It's a crazy topic. You know, I can remember whenever I was in middle school, there was a small group of people that started attending our church, and they all came with the head coverings, and they kind of tried to start this movement, and they were trying to talk to all the women. And I can see where whenever you read this is confusing. You think, oh, are we supposed to cover our heads today? But this very much is a cultural issue in Corinth. We're called to be set apart. We're not to look like the world. And at this point in time, the world was looking one way, and Paul is saying, hey, let's look different. So that's what I leave you with. We're going to go on to the rest of this chapter in the next podcast episode. It's the Lord's Supper, and it's been the one I've really been excited about getting to. So I'll see you then. Happy reading. See you next time.